Hello, I'd like to make a short but important video on Fujifilm, an acute observation since I'm always looking at things from 1,000 different angles that other people have failed to notice. With the release of the XH1, if you look at the spectrum of Fujifilm cameras relational to that of Nikon and Canon and Sony, it is the case, and if you'll bear with me just for a second, it's undeniable that Fujifilm has a better, broader spectrum of cameras than the absolutely enormous Nikon and Canon. Certainly so over that of Sony, whatever you think of Sony one way or the other. Simply looking at the spectrum with the inclusion now of the XH1, and let's take a look at the current lineup and what we know that Fujifilm will be coming out with, which will be later this year, the X-T3 with a backside illuminated sensor, certainly so a 28 megapixel backside illuminated sensor, quite probably the Panasonic sensor in the X-T3 with the inclusion of a lot of additional features. Also, too, with the release or announcement, it hasn't been made yet, announcement of a new, cheaper version of their GFX medium format sensor inside of a large X Pro digital rangefinder body, basically a large X Pro looking camera holding the 50 megapixel sensor, and of course the inclusion later next year when it's announced and when it's released, who knows, the 100 megapixel medium format, I guess it's going to be called the GFX 100S, I'm only assuming, since it'll be a 100 megapixel sensor. Taking a look at what Nikon has, and I know you're going to immediately say, well, Fujifilm doesn't have a full-frame sensor, and that's the case, but neither does Canon, nor does Nikon have a medium format camera, and Fujifilm is about to release two. If you analyze the fact that reductively what Nikon actually has is way too many, and Nikon's actually admitted this, way too many dinky cameras, D3000, D5000 series cameras. Reducibly, what Nikon actually has is a so-so, not so hot, and I don't own one for a reason, flagship camera, Nikon D5. They have their all-purpose Nikon D850, they have the Nikon D500, and a couple entry-level cameras, which you could really reduce to two, essentially, one from the D3000, one from the D5000, D5000 series range. But Fujifilm has now, with the XH1, far superior video options than Nikon or Canon has, which is not saying much, ultimately, and we certainly all know that whatever you think of Sony one way or the other, they have been focused on and are superior in the video department, overheating issues notwithstanding, and that, of course, is undeniable by anybody. But taking a look at the spectrum of cameras that Fuji has, they're absolutely incredible. In my announcement last year, was the best inexpensive camera to buy, period, value-wise, which is about to get a huge firmware update, the X-T20, the X Pro line, the XE series, the X-T2, which is a camera I never travel anywhere with, now without. It's over in my back room behind the camera that I brought with me down here to Florida. Their GFX, and now what Fujifilm is calling their flagship camera. Necessarily so, since it does include an IBIS mechanism. It's impossible to make a camera with an IBIS mech and not actually increase the thickness of the camera by no less than 8 millimeters, which is fine. A lot of people have said, oh, I'm worried about what Fujifilm is doing here. This camera is huge. The people that have been using the XH1, and it has a DSLR profile. It's a large, beefy camera. Undeniably so. I mean, 25% increase of thickness on the frame of the camera would not necessarily make the camera beefy. However, the IBIS mechanism does, but IBIS for video use is incredibly helpful. What I've said about IBIS in the past is undeniable regarding photography, but it's also undeniable how helpful IBIS is for video use, for videographers. I mean, that's absolutely undeniable. That is a DSLR. Basically, it looks like it has a thinner version of the Nikon D500 grip, a D750 grip, that everybody really loves. And if you take a look at what Fujifilm has, they have a far better, more diversified portfolio, if you will, of range of cameras than Nikon or Canon or Sony has. Not everything is going to be a thin little camera with 100 dials on top. Not that I'm complaining about that, since I own quite a few of them. What have I got? 7 Fujifilm cameras? With the X-H1, if you take a look at what the entirety of Fujifilm offers, with their XE series, with their X Pro series, with their XT2, XT3, and XT1, the XT3 is coming out, obviously, later this year, and the inclusion of a cheaper, so to say, medium format camera in the size of a digital rangefinder. That's incredible, and it's not my opinion or belief or feeling. However, it's an undeniable fact that Fujifilm has a more diversified spectrum of cameras to satisfy the desires of photographers by and large, whatever their needs may be, over that of Canon or Nikon or Sony. And considering, the size of Fujifilm, which even Fujifilm themselves will say, hey, we're not that big of a company, is more diversified than Nikon and Canon or Sony. I mean, and in such a short period of time, that's absolutely unfreaking believable. And why nobody is mentioning this in any board or any video is kind of beyond me. There's nobody stepped back and said, whoa, if you take a look at everything that Fujifilm has, it's a lot more than even Nikon or Canon or Sony has. And that's really something absolutely incredible within a short period of time from a quote-unquote small company. And those are the words not only of others, but also the words of Fujifilm execs. Hey, Fujifilm's not that big of a company. That's their own words. And yet, far more diversified for camera offerings than the super huge, so to say, Nikon and Canon. That's really important. Nobody's talking about that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Hope you like these videos, and I'm going to go out shooting tomorrow and catch you later. I think my face is a little sunburned, just a little bit. Bye.